was a big difference with respect to style. I think many people, and I as I watched it, were interested to see Mitt Romney was very energized and excited to be at the debate last night, and I think the president, very articulate, but perhaps a little less so. So with respect to style, I think there were some differences there. In terms of substance, they covered a huge set of issues, and I think it was very interesting to me to hear them talk about tax policy, healthcare policy, energy policy, what they're going to do about the budget deficit, and many other critical areas that are really going to have just a huge effect on how the country performs economically in the years ahead. With respect to the substance, I think it's somewhat less clear, partly because the two candidates could only summarize their own policies or their opponents' policies at a very high level. So some of these things are quite complicated: energy policy, tax policy, Medicare policy, and so forth. And so I think on that dimension, it was somewhat less clear. But in terms of the style, I think many people agreed, had the view afterwards that in terms of style, that the challenger, Mitt Romney, fared somewhat better on that front. So I think that the mainstream press enjoys the style stuff quite a lot. But I think in terms of the voters, and not just the voters, but kids and people who don't vote, just the whole country, it's really the substance that's ultimately going to matter. And at some level, I think it would be helpful if the media did a better job of educating people a bit more about the challenges that the country faces. We have some really big challenges. We have this huge budget deficit, demographics that are going to change quite significantly over the next few decades as we go from having five non-elderly adults for every elderly adult to 3 for every elderly adult. And that's going to create some strain on the economy because of Social Security, Medicare, and other things. And I think to the extent that the media could do a better job educating people on these challenges, that would, I think, make it more helpful to telescope in on the specifics of the policies, because these policies end up being summarized at a very high level, unfortunately, and so that causes people to focus a little more on style than on substance. I think on tax policy, so tax policy is going to be quite possibly issue number 1 after whoever wins the election. And I think the debate did do quite a good job of highlighting the differences between the two candidates. On the one hand, Mitt Romney has a proposal out that involves lowering tax rates and broadening the base. And one thing that he's been criticized for is not specifying how is he going to broaden the base. When we talk about broadening the base, that might involve, well, let's get rid of the mortgage interest deduction, or let's not allow people to deduct state and local income taxes from their taxes, and so forth. There's a lot of specifics. As soon as you talk about those specific deductions, immediately people say, well, wait a sec, I'm not so sure. And so I think one thing that Mitt Romney has been criticized for is, even people like to hear lower rates, but that's going to have to come along with something else if we're not going to have revenues plummet. And so last night he did sketch out in somewhat more clearly what he has in mind on that front. With respect to the president, I think the president sort of talked about the policies that he has been pursuing and that he continues to push for going forward. So as one example, I think that a big difference exists in terms of how are you going to tax very high income people. And it is, I think they had a vigorous debate about that. The Obama team, the Obama administration would basically push to return the tax rates to where they were, let's say, in the 1990s. And the Romney plan would call for lowering them below where they currently are. And that's a really big difference, and that is going to have a big effect on the economy, on budget deficits, and other things too. I think it was somewhat helpful, but I think if you really want to understand what the different plans would mean for you and your family, or for your company, or for just the country, I think the debate wouldn't give you enough information, unfortunately. And I don't fault the moderator or the candidates. It's just, it is somewhat complicated. But I think people who tuned into that debate and listened closely should emerge with a somewhat better understanding of the two plans. So I think the debate, 90 minutes, there's a lot to cover. I think that we learned quite a lot. I think they did a good job of explaining why it's not great for the country to be running such a large budget deficits, because essentially at some level we're leaving this burden to future generations, to our kids, to basically pay for these deficits that we are running up. So I think they both did a very good job of sort of arguing why we shouldn't keep doing that, and why it's not in the country's best economic interests. With respect to, and we heard a lot about tax policy, if you're going to lower the budget deficit, I think I agree with the candidates that if you grow the economy more quickly, that's going to help to reduce it. But we're also going to have to make some difficult choices with respect to government spending. And the big ticket items in government spending, Social Security, Medicare, defense, and so forth, we didn't hear much about how exactly they would slow the spending on those programs. And right now, the budget deficit in the U.S. is quite large. It's basically over $1 trillion. So in terms of per U.S. resident, that's more than $3,000 per U.S. resident. That's a lot. That's a lot to be for us as a country to be borrowing each year. And so how we're going to bring that down is going to be driven to a large extent by what we do on spending. And the candidates were pretty vague there.